Hello and welcome to Money Matters. My name is Mike Verrill and I am the Vice President of Strategic Development for Sharp Financial Group. Through our related companies, Sharp Accounting and Tax, Sharp Advisory, Sharp Capital, and Sharp Wealth Management, we offer a full range of resources to help entrepreneurs grow their businesses and protect their personal wealth to guarantee or help provide future success. Success is just the beginning. From time to time, financial issues relating to life sciences, technology companies, or other related companies may be discussed on the show. These discussions are not and should not be viewed as financial advice. Moreover, since the program is pre-recorded and shown at a later date, please keep in mind that the information may no longer be current. You should always check with your financial advisor before entering into any financial transaction. We have a guest I'm very excited to introduce, Cheryl Beth Kuchler with Ballantree Consulting. Cheryl Beth, welcome to our program. It is great to see you.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Cheryl Beth, I'm looking forward to getting into our discussion, but before that, I was hoping you could help me answer a question from one of our viewers.
Sure.
This is from Rodney Norman of Exton. What are the two biggest mistakes that business people make today? Broad topic, but see if you can give us a couple tidbits to help Rodney and other viewers.
I was going to say, from my experience, one of the biggest mistakes is overlooking the strategy. You know, what are they really trying to accomplish? What's their plan for the future? And actually sharing that with someone or getting some outside advice, or even if it's another business owner. Mm-hmm. You know, calling up a peer and saying, hey, I'd like to share my plans with you, get your feedback and your interaction, and then actually writing that down. Right.
Committing in writing to what you say you're going to do, so you do it.
Yeah, because we know that there's you have a 200 times better chance of actually getting something done if you write it down.
Wow, that's significant. My experience has been that the most successful business owners do rely on other advisors that really help them grow. It's not something you can do alone, right? Mm-hmm. Growing a business is very complex and can be difficult. So that is great insight. I know in your role you certainly experience helping other business owners through those very exact issues. Mm-hmm. If you have questions that you'd like to submit to Money Matters for future shows, listen here now to find out how you can send in your questions to Money Matters TV.
Site money-matterstv.com. On our homepage, click on the banner on the right that says Send Us Your Questions. While you're on our website, you can find information about our hosts and guests, as well as show notes and links about this show and past shows. Money Matters is also available as a podcast on iTunes and Stitcher, so you can listen to Money Matters while you're on the go. That website address, again, is money, M-O-N-E-Y, -matters, M-A-T-T-E-R-S, TV.com.
We are continuing our discussion, our conversation with small and mid-sized business owners and executives about what they need to know to grow their companies and the experts they turn to for help. Cheryl Beth is a strategy expert with a great perspective on success. She holds a BS degree in chemical engineering and a Master's of Science degree in organization development from American University and NTL Institute. She has worked for large companies like Procter & Gamble and as a consultant for companies like DuPont, General Electric, Amazon, and the Johnson & Johnson family of companies. She has broad experience across organizations, having worked in the corporate office, finance, manufacturing, and engineering. She is now the president of Ballantree Consulting Corporation and the founder of CEO Think Tank. Since 2001, her focus has been on providing business consulting and coaching services to CEOs, business owners, and senior executives of small to mid-sized businesses and running think tanks for executives. Cheryl Beth, based on that background, at what point did you decide to start working with smaller companies, the big company background, and did you feel like you'd gained enough success and you wanted to make a bigger impact? Talk to us a little bit about what that decision process was like.
It was actually an opportunity. So yeah, I had been working with basically Fortune 50 companies, going in and working with leadership teams and doing Six Sigma work way back when, and had the opportunity, was referred into a $48 million distribution company, actually in northeastern Philadelphia, and who needed help with their strategic plan. And I went in and spent 2 days with their leadership team and fell in love with small companies. I loved having the impact. It was great to be able to work with a CEO directly, her leadership team, and help them to put a plan in place. And then had the opportunity to continue to work with them. And I was like, yeah, this is great. I want to have an impact. I want to do more. One of my advisors at the time, though, said, well, that's all well and good, but how are you going to make any money? Because you can't charge them what you charge the big guys.
Right.
And so that's actually where CEO Think Tank came from, was, well, if I get 10 or 12 or 14 of them together in an executive roundtable group, I can offer an offering that's cost effective, but I can still make an impact and work with them.
And what were some of the challenges in making that transition from a big company environment? Was it just the financial piece, or were there other things that you had to kind of scale down your thought process, or what did you go through to kind of go from that big company thinking, right? You go into a small company and you say, that's how the big company does it, right?
Yes.
Somehow you have to make a transition in the mindset.
Yeah, well, and that was one of the biggest issues that the CEOs that I started to work with had, right, was, well, we can't do what you did at P&G because Procter & Gamble has all this time, money, and resources. And I said, well, we can't do everything that we did at Procter, but we can do some of the things. And so it was really, as Vern Harnish, who I ended up adopting his philosophy and his methodology from Mastering the Rockefeller Habits, he says, we have to downsize it for us mere mortals at the small mid-market level. And I was in the process of creating my own intellectual property and my own tools to work with the smaller companies. And I ended up reading Mastering the Rockefeller Habits. And one of my other advisors, so I use advisors as well, practice what I preach, said, well, don't reinvent the wheel. Vern Harnish already has all the intellectual property. And I read the book again and said, yep, this is what I want to do. So in 2008, I ended up becoming a certified Gazelles coach with his company.
Did you look at other management programs similar to Vern's? Did you go through a due diligence process to come upon Vern's, or did you kind of trust the advice of your advisor and buy in right away when you read Vern's
Yeah,
book?
there are other methodologies out there. There is a one-page plan format that was being used at the time, but Vern had actually his the Gazelles and the one-page plan that he designed back in the 90s has literally been used and back in 2008 it had actually been used by thousands of companies in the U.S. and in Mexico, and since then he's broadened it. It's now been used by tens of thousands of companies. There's coaches and companies on 6 continents. So it's a really robust, it's a very, very robust process.
Yeah, and the beta's been confirmed,
yes,
right? For
absolutely.
sure, time and time again. Well,
Yeah.
That's great. So you had that background and kind of knew, believing in what you were reading, that you could adopt this for the companies.
Yep.
When you're sitting down initially with the company, are you seeing common threads in the initial conversation? Are there a lot of like-minded challenges that these entrepreneurs are coming up against initially, or is it a broad
There's
base?
usually issues in one of 4 areas, which is why we call it the 4 decisions. They're having some type of people problem.
Okay.
They either can't find the people, or they can't retain them, or they're not engaged. They don't have, as Jim Collins says, the right people in the right seats.
Right.
There usually is, so companies will hit predictable, what Vern calls the valleys of death, predictable growth, stumbles, potholes. Someplace between 1 and 10 million.
Okay.
There's usually a problem with not just the people, but also, am I really able to generate the income that I was able to generate until I made it to 2 to 3 million?
Right.
That sustainable strategy problem. And the same thing happens someplace around 15 or 20 or 25 million. And then there's usually some type of cash problem, not financial problem, but really finance. Usually the entrepreneurs have their heads right around the finance, but they're not always managing cash.
Right.
Right,
Cash flow in a
yes,
business,
cash
right,
flow in a
absolutely,
business, which
yeah.
I'm sure you've
work with
run into that all the
companies,
time.
for the exact same problem.
Yep,
Yeah,
exactly.
I'm convinced most businesses fail not because the idea is not great or the execution. It's because business owners don't understand how to manage through their highs and lows of cash.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. And Vern actually talks about that in his latest book, Scaling Up. He'll talk about the number one issue is a lack of marketing expertise. A lot of entrepreneurs, as you probably know, can sell ice to Eskimos and sand to Bedouins.
Right.
But they get to a point where they can't carry the organization on their shoulders anymore, and they have to have a more systematic way.
And so I would guess the people problem sometimes is within the entrepreneur that you're talking about. Maybe,
could be.
Which hats should you keep? Which hats do you need to give up? Which hats? So talk about that process a little bit. I mean, that must be part of the initial self-realization, right, before you can move forward with the rest of the business.
Yeah, of the need to delegate. Actually, and there's some great exercises in like Michael Gerber's the E-Myth, right, about figuring out what all the different functions are in an organization that need to be run, who's actually running that, and then having the entrepreneur go through an exercise where they are systematically taking their hats off and finding the right person that's actually going to run that particular function for them.
Well, it's interesting. Why don't you want to go through maybe each of the 4 pillars and talk about those, give it some kind of an explanation on each and kind of what business owners should be thinking about as they go through each step in the process?
Yeah, and we can even we can do a couple case studies.
Okay, that'd be great.
If you'd like.
Absolutely.
There's
I think viewers always like to hear the real life stories of other entrepreneurs who have gone through some of these things and find similarities in them.
Yeah, we'll change some names to protect the innocent.
Absolutely. It goes without saying, right?
Yeah, so yeah, in the people area, and this is some of the questions that business people ought to be asking themselves, is as they've grown, are the people that they currently have really the ones that are going to help them meet their goals, right? So getting back to the original mistake that a business owner or CEO makes, which is not to sit down and say, where are we going? Are we really trying to grow a company? And you can get sucked into the lure of the top line when really you need to be focused on gross profit.
Sure. Sustainability, right?
Right, and sustainable gross profit. So where are we trying to go? Am I trying to grow this? So we had one company that was around $25 million in revenue. It's a manufacturing company, been around, 3rd generation, had plants in the U.S. and in China, and they had hit a stalemate around 20 or 25 million. They just the team had gotten them to that point, but they wanted to continue to grow sustainably. Past the 30 million mark. And so when we went in, that was one of the first exercises that we did, was really took a look at the talent that they had and evaluated them not just on the results that they were getting, but also on how good of a culture fit. Because that's the other thing that small business folks have a tendency sometimes to overlook, is the importance of a strong culture. Right. And they actually had very, very strong core values. But really weren't holding people accountable, to living up to those values and behaving that way. And as we looked at the CEO's leadership team, we recognized there was one person in particular, an engineer that they had just brought on 6 months before, who really wasn't living the culture, and that was impacting his ability to get results. So he ended up, but fortunately the CEO had a customer who was retiring an engineer. Okay. So they actually had someone who knew their business, and he was able to get rid of the engineer that wasn't performing and bring in someone who was retiring from a customer but still had plenty of runway left.
How many people were in the company at that time?
There were about 150 here in the U.S. and there
Okay.
were 50 over in China.
Wow, so that's a good number of people. I mean, to have one person impact the culture like that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when you're in charge of the engineering department for a company that's very geared around not research and development so much, but a lot of product innovation. They did a lot of custom machine work
Right.
for companies like Harley Davidson.
Okay.
And it was also really important for them to stay within the guidelines of ISO. They would have audits regularly around their quality.
Right.
So the engineering position was pretty critical
Okay.
to the
Very precise,
organization.
piece of the. Did they have? Were you able to garner from them whether they had any lessons learned in going back and looking at the process they went through to hire that person to not be able to identify that they would have fit their culture?
Yes. Yeah, they actually did recognize that they were hiring around the skills that they needed, but they weren't doing as good of a job looking at the core values
Okay.
and hiring and asking behaviorally oriented questions around core values.
So when you talk about getting the right people, you must start first making sure their core values
Right.
are clearly aligned and
Well, and even even having the
Define it,
company
right.
define. I mean, in their case, they had. I mean, the company was 65 years old. They actually had core values that they were using, but they weren't really using them in a robust way. And taking a step back as a leadership team and said, what is this really?
right.
What do we really mean? And on every 90-day basis, going back, that's what we helped them to implement was a 90-day talent review process, not once a year. Literally looking at your talent on a 90-day basis to
Right.
say, is this the right person? Are they doing the right things? What do we need if we have an A player? Because that was the other thing is they had a couple of A players that they really weren't recognizing, that they weren't engaging,
Okay.
they weren't developing them, and they were losing them as
Yeah.
a result.
Yeah, either become stale and not interested or,
Right.
or look to leave
Right.
and go somewhere else.
Yeah.
I know we've talked about that before, and that seems to be a trend that companies are looking at is that more frequent review of performance and expectations rather than waiting for that annual review and
Right.
It's going to be the obligatory review. It's long
Well,
drawn out process.
and the nice thing nowadays is there's some very cool tools out there and apps that can help you to do that.
Okay.
There's a tool called 15.5 that some of your viewers may be interested in checking out. It's actually the number 15/FIVE.
Okay.
It's been around since the 80s. There's a great story on the website if you check it out, but it allows the companies that we work with to ask their employees once a week or once every couple weeks to fill out what are your top priorities for the coming weeks, and then what are their goals, what do they feel excited about, where did they maybe make a mistake, or where are they stuck.
Right. Right.
That's the 15 minutes part, and then it takes 5 minutes for your manager to review it. And
Okay.
because it's on a computer, it's sort of like Facebook and some of the social media sites where
Okay.
you get a lot more from people when they're not looking you in the face.
Yeah. Right. I mean, more honest.
Exactly.
Some reason they
And
think that-
millennials
yeah.
in particular react to it really well, and they feel like you're paying attention to them. So
well,
it's
that's
a good
important.
thing.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, that's a great tool for engagement too,
Yes,
right? 'Cause
absolutely.
They constantly feel like somebody's looking after them and they've got to stand up and be accountable.
Yeah. Well, and there is a question at the very bottom. It actually prompts the manager to set, the question is, what has so-and-so done this week that you're really excited about? So it prompts you to give them
Okay.
positive
Yeah,
feedback.
come on, it's in there, give it.
It is.
Oh, that's great.
Exactly.
That's great.
Yeah.
So once a company's kind of identified, as you said, the right people in the right roles and identify the people problem and maybe where there's some spots where they need development, what's next? Where do they go? What's the next step?
Well, to actually make the move to either, in the case of the A players, what are we doing to engage them? Have we sat down with them recently and had a conversation about their development?
Right.
What excites them? What do they want to be doing more of? What do they want to be doing less of?
Right.
If it's someone who's a B player, someone who is living up to the culture but isn't performing, what do we need to do to develop them or move them? Why are they not performing? maybe they're a great culture fit, but they're in the wrong seat.
Right.
Right, so consciously managing it. And then anyone who's really not living up to the core values and the culture is ultimately going to contaminate the culture.
Right, yeah.
And Jim Collins says you really can't change somebody who's not living the core culture or the core values.
Yeah.
You're wasting your time.
No some gain there, right? Just move on.
Yeah, well, and they're gonna, and those are typically the people that when you finally do, they either leave the organization or you ask them to leave. Are the people, everybody else will come up to you afterwards, right? And that's what happened in this case with the CEO. There was someone who just wasn't living the core culture, even though they were performing.
Right.
And when they finally got rid of them, people came up to the CEO and said, "Thank God, thank you very much for getting rid of." I mean, so unfortunately, he heard stories that were not the best.
Yeah, after the fact.
After the fact.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and that's typically I've heard that on multiple occasions.
You see that a lot.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Is that what can CEOs do, business owners do, to kind of create a more open dialogue with other employees so they get that feedback? Or are there things that you suggest for them to do so that doesn't happen again? Because I guess to some extent, if they're not coming up and telling the owner,
right, then
there's some discomfort in the current exchange of information, the communication, right? They're worried about sharing that.
Yeah, I think it's helpful to have. It's certainly helpful just to reach out to employees. In fact, we're doing that now. We're, of course, because of the end of the year and the beginning of the year, we've probably done 10 or 12 annual planning sessions in the past few weeks. And part of the process that we suggest that CEOs and their teams do is to reach out to their employees and say, what are we doing that's really good? What do we want to continue? Some people call it the stop, start, continue.
Okay.
I like to call it the continue, stop, start.
Right.
Like, what are we doing well?
Yeah,
right?
let's get that one. Let's talk that first.
Let's
positive
talk that one
first,
right?
Yeah.
What are we doing really well? And then instead of saying, what do you want me to stop doing, what's one thing that's demotivating you? So it's the way that you ask the question.
Right.
What am I doing to demotivate you? And acknowledge as a CEO or acknowledge as a leader that I may be behaving in a way that's demotivating you.
Right.
And that can open up the dialogue.
This is a new and open way of thinking for probably a lot of business owners who've grown their businesses.
Probably, yes.
And so, talk about the challenges.
It's why only 4% of companies make it to $1 million.
Is that
Yes.
the statistic? 4% of companies make it to $1 million.
Yes, and only 4% of that make it to 10 million.
Wow. That's very small numbers. When so many companies and the economy in the U.S. is built on so many small businesses. You think about that. Those statistics are, it's a large pool, right? Interesting.
Yeah.
So once you get past that, the people pillar, what is the next pillar that you move to?
Well, so how are you actually generating top-line revenue? Top-line, we call it top-line the gross profit, top-line revenue, right? So what is your strategy? Who is your customer? Who are you going after? How are you positioning your products? Are you spending time and money on the most profitable products? Do you even know which ones are the most profitable?
Yes.
Right?
Well, that's a lot of times we find that they don't know what that is, right? They focus on that top line revenue, but of multiple scenarios where you do a P&L on a particular service or product and realize that that's losing money, you know, and they're putting as much energy into that as something that could be more profitable.
Right. Well, and that's why strategy and really requires someone to, it could be the CEO, sometimes it's the CEO, but sometimes it's having a strong controller in place who can really analyze, so what is making us money and what isn't. One of our other companies is a company we worked with a few years ago that we're going back in again to work with this year. Staffing company, focused in the medical area. So they do nurses and pharmacists and that type of thing. And they've grown from less than 10 million to close to 15 over the last few years.
Wow.
But one of the key issues for them as they think about going to 20 and 25 is where are they really profitable? And so they've brought a strong controller in who's got a very good background as formerly a CPA. And he's really taking a look at their financials and saying, well, you know, this part of the business is great. This area, not so much. You know, why are we spending our time selling this when we should be selling that? So that's the type of overlap that you get into when you start thinking about strategy.
Do you have another story, a client story that you want to share that kind of gives example of a few of those different aspects that you've taken them through? Maybe somebody in progress now, or maybe somebody you've worked with and has reached that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other story, actually, interestingly enough, another company that's in Manhattan, who had gotten to about 15 or 16 million, their design company, and about 100 people. And the CEO, had added a lot of people to support the growth from 10 to 15. But when they got to 15 or 16, they, again, went in, tried to work with them to develop a plan. And you know, it's an interesting thing when you actually start to try and implement the plan, that's when you start to see the rocks a little bit more clearly, the potholes. And what she set some pretty aggressive growth goals, and what she ended up realizing was, oh, you know what? We don't have a sustainable form of revenue generation. We're really order takers. And they had been able to hit 15, 16 million regularly just by taking orders, and they're dealing with companies like Nordstrom's and American Eagle and big names. But when they tried to go from 15 to 20, that's when they hit That's
when they realized it wasn't real.
Wasn't really
solid,
systematic.
Right. There wasn't a process behind it.
They didn't have a recipe. And so she actually brought in someone to manage the sales team, who not just was a sales manager, coach, but also someone who could help them to put the right systems in place. And so they worked together for about 6 months last year. And they're off to an amazing start this year.
That's great.
They've really hit the ball out of the park.
Are you seeing a sense from your clients that they're experiencing improvement in the economy?
It depends. So we have a company we're working with in the helicopter space. And one of their big customers, their big revenue comes from oil and gas. So it's not a good, wasn't necessarily a good year for them.
And I heard an economist just recently say that oil is going down to maybe $20 a barrel. So there's not looking up anytime soon. Yeah,
and if you're in the industrial segment, it really does depend. I mean, B2C, one of our resources, another resource that we use is the Institute for Trends Research, which is up in New Hampshire. They're very, very well known. Have been around for over 60 years, very good economists, but they'll acknowledge that if you're in the B2C business, the consumers right now are really the ones driving the economy. And so if you're in B2C, or if you're B2B who's working with businesses who are working with consumers, then you're in a somewhat better spot. There are I've seen some writings now from the Economist that says we're basically in somewhat of an industrial recession. Depending.
So this has been great. I feel like we've just scratched the surface. We could talk a lot longer. A lot of exciting stories, and I think companies got a good sense of some tidbits on growth and what they should be thinking about. So thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Hope the viewers enjoyed the conversation too. Our next guest will be Brian Korkotelis of Design Blends, a home redevelopment company. And as a reminder, you can download the podcast from iTunes and Stitcher Radio, as well as see programs on our YouTube channel and our website, money-matterstv.com. Thank you.